Imagine a wall of dark syrup taller than a two-story house, rushing toward you at the speed of a galloping horse. On January 15, 1919, a steel tank containing more than 2 million gallons of molasses exploded in the north end of Boston, unleashing a wave of sticky death that swallowed everything in its path. 21 people drowned in the sweet, suffocating mass, their final moments spent struggling against a substance that grew thicker and harder with every desperate movement. But this was not some freak accident of nature or simple industrial mishap. The disaster that turned a winter afternoon into a scene from a nightmare had been waiting to happen for years, and the warning signs were written in the very metal that failed. This is what really happened on the day Boston drowned in sweetness. The north end of Boston in January of 1919 was a place where old world and new collided on every street corner. Italian immigrants hung laundry between tenement windows, while Irish longshoremen hauled cargo at the docks. Children played stickball in narrow alleys, and the smell of baking bread mixed with the salt air from the harbor. Rising above this crowded neighborhood stood a massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet across, painted brown to blend with the molasses it contained. The tank belonged to the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, and it had been built hastily during the Great War when molasses was needed to produce industrial alcohol for munitions. The war had ended just 2 months earlier, but the tank remained, a looming presence that had become part of the neighborhood landscape. People who lived nearby had grown accustomed to the structure, though some complained about the smell and the way molasses sometimes leaked from the seams, dripping down the sides like dark honey. Children would bring cups to catch the drips, scooping up the sweet syrup to take home. The tank groaned and creaked when it was full, sounds that echoed through the streets on quiet nights. Some residents worried, but others shrugged. The neighborhood was full of strange sounds and smells. This was just one more. On that January day, the temperature had risen unexpectedly, climbing into the low 40s after a week of bitter cold. The tank was nearly full, having just received a shipment of molasses from the Caribbean. Inside the steel walls, the thick syrup was warming, expanding, creating pressure against metal that had never been properly tested for strength. At approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, workers at a nearby paving company heard a sound like machine gun fire, a rapid series of pops and cracks. Then came a low rumble that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The tank exploded with a force that sent steel panels flying like sheets of paper in a windstorm. Some pieces of metal, weighing several tons, were thrown more than 200 feet. But the real killer was the molasses itself. 2 million gallons of thick brown syrup burst forth in a wave that reached 25 feet high at its peak, moving at 35 miles per hour. Those who saw it coming described it as a dark wall, almost solid-looking, that seemed to swallow light as it advanced. The wave hit the elevated railway support columns first, snapping the steel girders like twigs and nearly derailing a train that happened to be passing overhead. Then it slammed into the buildings along Commercial Street. A firehouse was lifted off its foundation, with firefighters inside scrambling to escape through windows as the building tilted and cracked. Wooden tenements collapsed under the weight of the syrup, their walls splintering inward. People who were inside had no chance to run. The molasses poured through doorways and windows, filling ground floor rooms in seconds. Antonio D'Estasio was 10 years old, sent by his mother to gather firewood near the waterfront. The wave caught him in the open, lifting him off his feet and tumbling him forward in a confusion of brown darkness. He could not tell which way was up. The molasses filled his nose and mouth, thick and suffocating. By pure chance, the current carried him against a piece of debris that kept his head above the surface long enough for rescuers to spot him. His sister Maria, who had been standing just a few feet away, was never found. The molasses did not behave like water. It was thick and sticky, and the January cold was already causing it to congeal. People trapped in the syrup could not swim through it or push it aside. The more they struggled, the more exhausted they became, and the substance seemed to grip them tighter. Horses pulling delivery wagons were caught mid-stride, their legs stuck fast as the molasses rose around them. They screamed and thrashed until the syrup covered their heads, and they could scream no more. Days later, workers would find their bodies still standing, preserved in place like insects in amber. The rescue efforts began within minutes, but the molasses made everything impossible. Firefighters waded into the mess trying to reach people who were crying for help, but the syrup was waist-deep in places, and every step was a battle. Ladders sank into the stuff and could not be braced properly. Ropes became useless, coated in molasses that made them impossible to grip. Some rescuers became trapped themselves and had to be pulled out by their colleagues. The harbor water was pumped in to try to thin the molasses, and workers used saws to cut through the hardening crust that formed on top, hoping to find air pockets where survivors might be trapped. But the cold January air was working against them, turning the molasses more solid with each passing hour. By evening, the death toll was clear. 21 people had died, and more than 150 were injured. The dead included children and elderly people, workers and residents who had simply been in the wrong place. Some bodies were not recovered for weeks, buried under hardened molasses that had to be chipped away piece by piece. The cleanup would take months, with workers using sand and salt water to break down the sticky residue. But the smell never truly left. For decades afterward, old-timers would say that on hot summer days, you could still catch the scent of molasses in the North End, a ghost smell that lingered in the wood of old buildings and the cracks between paving stones. The investigation that followed revealed what many had suspected. The tank had been poorly designed and shoddily constructed. It had never been properly tested or inspected. The steel was too thin, and the rivets were inadequate. The company had ignored complaints and warning signs, including visible leaks and the groaning sounds that residents had reported. On that warm January day, the combination of full capacity, rising temperature, and structural weakness had created a disaster waiting to happen. The company fought liability for years, but eventually paid out in settlements, though no amount of money could restore what had been lost. The Great Molasses Flood, as it came to be known, became one of those stories that sounds almost absurd in the telling, until you sit with the details and realize the horror of it. There is something uniquely terrible about drowning in something sweet, something that should bring pleasure turned into an instrument of death. The children who caught drips in their cups could not have known they were tasting the substance that would kill their neighbors. The workers who heard the tank groan could not have imagined the violence of its failure. Boston rebuilt, as cities do. The neighborhood healed, though the scars remained in memory, and in the careful way new industrial structures were regulated and inspected. The disaster led to stricter building codes and greater accountability for corporations whose structures posed public danger. But on quiet January days, when the temperature rises unexpectedly and the city feels suspended between winter and something softer, there are still those who remember the story their grandparents told, of the day sweetness became terror, and a city learned that progress without caution carries a price measured in lives cut short and a smell that never quite fades away.